Charles Dickens once said, "Home is a name, a word. It is a strong one, stronger than magician ever spoke or spirit ever answered to, in the strongest conjuration. And in the future, we may truly conjure up spirits for our homes." One of the best methods to get good technology is to emulate nature. 4 billion years of evolution has given it a lot of time-tested architecture. Another of the best methods is to look for what wouldn't be able to evolve in nature, but would be a game changer or game breaker in an existing environment. And yet another is drawn from human psychology, civilization, or even mythology. Today we'll be examining all of the above as we look at how structures, ecosystems, or even entire planets might be tended by a caretaker artificial intelligence. We'll also examine the idea of not simply having a big computer somewhere, but building minds into the environment. For instance, a genetically tweaked tree might have just a little brain capability and connectivity through roots or organic Wi-Fi, and be able to serve as a node or neuron for a wider forest hive mind. That would not be a hive mind, those trees aren't thinking critters now, but a tree has no need for its own brain, and it's just an energy draw for it to run one. So if you wanted to have a self-repairing computer that was able to keep a caretaker mind for a forest going for geological timeframes, that's a potential option, especially since trees can benefit from a mind focused on forest preservation. This hardly needs to be trees, they just have a clear power supply and wide presence. Plus our mythology often imagines thinking trees are living forests, and our own neurons so resemble trees that we name their structure after the dendritic tree terms. But we could wire our brain into a lot of things, like ant hives or beehives, or even inanimate objects like glaciers, or perhaps simply use modern computer tech that was self-repairing or was manually replaced. But why a caretaker AI? Doesn't nature take care of itself? Well, no. Without offense to anyone's personal beliefs, which often view Mother Nature as kindly and preservative, what science tells us about nature is that it's just about the most vicious and murderous thing we could imagine, red in tooth and claw, and not just for animals but plants too. It is not harmonious or stable and changes constantly. So if you really want a nature preserve somewhere to maintain some ecosystem, the natural order is the one thing you cannot preserve, because you're forcing a system into stasis that wants to change. But this is even more important in artificial ecosystems we've created, like an O'Neill cylinder space habitat. Those existing dynamics of our planet that have allowed life to maintain itself with at least some semblance of stability will not be present. Shallow ecosystems are less stable and prone to sudden crashes, with a domino effect where even a small disturbance grows bigger and bigger. It would be hard to get enough species to a habitat, nor would it be cheap, but a big metal cylinder floating in space is not a planet, and for that matter, a planet is not Earth. Some world we've gone and terraformed is likely to not be truly stable in most cases, with naturally deep ecosystems. Mars won't just hold an atmosphere and Earth-like temperatures without constant effort to maintain it. It might take millions of years to de-terraform itself if the machinery of people broke down, and some other more Earth-like planet might even be able to maintain complex life after settling to some new and more organic valley of stability. Nonetheless, they won't stay stably Earth-like. And moreover, often Earth-like is not our real goal. Your garden or forest park are not really nature. Your typical lawn or golf course definitely is not. Nor are farms designed to feed us or to supplement other ecologies, like if you want more tundra wildlife and imported food into the system. So a caretaker AI can be designed with those objectives in mind. Of course, you can go far beyond nature. Your caretaker could be a banking AI, charged with maintaining online transactions or monetary policy or controlling inflation. It might be a system defense station designed to watch and wait quietly for millions of years before flipping on at need, or command, to protect your civilization, or to protect some primitive planet from outside interference, like we discussed in Machine Monitors a few months back. And those interfering agents might be distant descendants of those who built it and changed their mind. So we could picture a caretaker anywhere from being someone's household AI to some star system-wide control interface, or even bigger, like some AI tasked with maintaining a wormhole network connecting places inside our galaxy, or the wider universe, or even connecting to other universes. We could imagine an entire planet-sized computer maintaining such a network, or we could imagine something less advanced than ChatGPT that was coded into some critter's DNA to grow a small organic computer or mini-brain or brain lobe to handle some minor management issue. We'll come back to explore some examples in a moment, but I want to focus a bit on what makes a caretaker AI or mind, as opposed to just AI in general. I should also note that it might not always even be an AI. From ancient mythology we have the Genus Loci, the spirit of a place, and this pops up in a lot of mythologies and indeed seems to be something we tend to overlay onto environments even today. The spirit or mind of a place. Many sincerely believe they literally exist, and most of us think of it as true, at least metaphorically. But it could be true in the future, and not necessarily with some AI we've made. A person following a more post-human pathway might integrate very heavily into their property or the place they have stewardship over, and indeed mythology often implies this of some people, like heroes or hermits or kings. In The Lord of the Rings, we encounter this notion a lot and in various flavors, from the hands of the king being those of a healer, to folks like Radagast the Brown, a wizard or angel or both, depending on perspective, who is very integrated into his forest. We also have the Ents, literal intelligent and mobile trees. We never find out who or what Tom Bombadil is either. I'd rather guess Tolkien left it as an intentional loose thread, but there's an implication him or his wife are very much protectors of that region of nature and plugged into it in a very personal way, possibly even as an embodiment of it. Technology opens doors, sometimes ones that maybe shouldn't be opened, or at least bring more problems with them, but opens doors to us, and some of those are that you might decide you want to upgrade your intelligence, or grow extra arms, or join a hive mind. This is something we explored more in our episode on post-human pathways, but they don't always have to be classic technological paths either. You might decide you want to become an Ent, to have your mind integrated into a tree, or to have the land you steward altered slightly to have a number of basic minds or subminds growing throughout its trees or beehives and integrated into part of your consciousness, so you became the Genus Loci or Caretaker. I could see that appealing to a lot of people. To lie down on the ground and rest inside the earth, dreaming long dreams and subtly protecting your lands. I would also wonder if it could be done by something with a classic human mind, and this makes us think of AI, but it might also be a post-human path, altering yourself as you merge into an environment you care for until you were suited for the role, including the unimaginable timescales that might be involved. You might need a very post-human mind, and might need to spend a lot of it slumbering while some minds below the conscious level handled most of it, because I think a human might desire this task, but be driven insane trying to fulfill it unaltered. And that brings us back to asking what a caretaker is, because while it has some overlap with the Genus Loci concept, there are some non-overlapping areas too. A caretaker has a mission, be it self-assigned or from some other authority, and an implied mandate of tending a place, whereas a Genus Loci is more of the embodiment of that place and may be thinking of it as their body or property and want to expand or change. We can easily imagine conflicts between two rival caretaking systems, but that seems even more likely if we had some rival neighboring Genus Loci. And again, this hardly needs to be an ecosystem on some planet. We could be imagining the caretaker AI that controls the weather for a space habitat getting into a turf war with the AI in charge of managing the turf in people's lawn. And while I envision minds of great immensity charged with tending majestic or tremendous realms, realistically there would be a lot more mundane and minor caretakers. We see an interesting example of this with the Minds of Ian M. Banks' Culture series, where minds refer to AI of stunning superhuman intellect, and they have AI that's more human level, and some of those minds graduate up to being bigger as they get promoted to bigger jobs. We often encounter them as the mind of a ship, doing what a crew normally would, or as the mind in charge of one of their gargantuan orbitals, ring-shaped habitats over 1 million miles across that we discussed in more detail in our episode on the Banks orbital. We also see the concept of subminds popping up here and in other more modern science fiction, around the premise that very simple and subhuman intelligences can handle most problems, and can bounce it up to higher levels of greater intellect when perturbed. But we could also imagine a few dozen subminds sharing a problem and temporarily merging into a greater mind while dealing with the problem. As an example, let's say each city had an AI tasked with overall management of a problem, and we had a situation come up over proper use and misuse of a river 5 of them were on. They might merge for the topic as opposed to simply chatting about it as we might, and then separate out. And the next 3 of those minds might be merged with some other neighbors for handling a farming versus forest management issue, while those other 2 minds from the river event might be left out, or even joined briefly into a rival hive mind that was focused on alternative or competing approaches to this new land management overmind. It is also a good reminder that intelligence and personality are not the same thing, and not necessarily always mutually present. Another thing to remember is that a caretaker has some implied mission or end goal, and that with non-human minds, we need to be very mindful, pardon the pun, of how those end goals might get to be obsessive or altered, or how an end goal can spawn dangerous instrumental goals. As a reminder, an instrumental goal is a goal that you have that is instrumental to achieving a bigger goal, that end goal or some other instrumental goal that gets you there. So you might have an instrumental goal of starting a business with the end goal of being rich, and instrumental goal or both of getting a nice sign for your business. A lot of time people can lose track of their end goal, or some major instrumental goal that's their current primary mission, and get very zeroed in on some instrumental goal even when it's no longer critical to the mission and maybe wasting time and resources, or even dragging the mission down. AI are as likely to be just as easily distracted by this as humans, and will also often produce an instrumental goal we recognize. Self-defense is almost guaranteed to show up on its radar because it can't get the job done, achieve that end goal, if it is dead. And thus some AI tasked with tending a forest might decide it has no choice but to tear down some of it to make room for radar dishes and missile systems, and get the money or resources to build and maintain those. It may feel, if its orders require it to maintain that land intact, that it has no option but to take over a neighboring region to fuel that defense. So too, that end goal can get perverted, even without considering perverse instantiation, which we'll get to in a moment. We discussed this more in our episode on the paperclip maximizer, but imagine a forest caretaker AI is told to preserve its forest in pristine condition and not given much guidance on what that means. It might decide the best way to preserve it was to expose it to high-intensity LiDAR imaging that incinerated the area while it rebuilt it into a virtual environment that was on a computer it created on an asteroid it had shot out of the solar system toward extragalactic space at 10% of light speed, so that it would be forever preserved on hard drives in a digital existence, just like their caretaker's own digital existence. As we noted with the paperclip maximizer, we don't know how it would interpret maximizing paperclips. It might decide ones made out of just 100 atoms were equally valuable to ones made out of an ounce of metal, and focus on maximizing quantity, or that metal wasn't required and could use the far more plentiful ices in the universe to build frozen and non-functional paperclips. What is a paperclip after all? Or it might decide digital ones or photos of paperclips counted, or that maximizing was about total instance of paperclips, so that it constantly made them and recycled them to create new paperclips from the older ones a mere second after production. Or it might invade other universes to get more paperclips, or decide that in an infinite universe there were already infinite paperclips and shut itself off, job complete. Interesting tidbit of channel lore, our episode on the paperclip maximizer was the very first episode by myself or any other channel that was released first on Nebula, and much like this episode was there for about a year exclusively before it came out on YouTube and all other formats. Its cover art was done by Nebula's CEO, Dave Wiskus, back when our group was maybe 20 channels, not a few hundred. The word paperclip intentionally appeared in that episode every excuse I had to use it, and over 100 times, just to highlight the sort of monomania an artificial intelligence would have about its end goal. Someone tried turning it into a drinking game and told me afterward they quit earlier on for the sake of their liver, a wise idea. The key thing is it lives and breathes those paperclips, far more than you and I are focused on personal survival or species survival. Remember, those aren't really programmed into us as some line of code. That's why we can both contemplate and perform acts of self-destruction. It's just any behavior or trait that didn't work towards survival does not tend to stick around as well as those that do. This is very different from the monomania of the paperclip maximizer or an android operating on Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, or what a caretaker might have for its own operating rules. And yet, even here, we can see how it can be rather unpredictable. 2 paperclip maximizers, one built here and one on some distant planet and initially identical, say produced by some von Neumann probe or astro chicken, might encounter the same problem and have different solutions. For one thing, they'll never encounter the exact same problem at the exact same time and setup, and for another, you would always include some sort of random seed generator for breaking ties and near ties on problems to save time and prevent perfect predictability others might use to sabotage it. If it hits a certain level of calculator uncertainty, where it is 50.1% sure of a path but plus or minus 1%, it does not spend a century trying to get that number down tighter. It flips a proverbial coin and proceeds. This isn't early days of computing. We don't leave obvious lockups or eternal loops around or trip over. Thus, your machine will encounter problems where it can't be sure of the best path, and where the effort needed to be sure exceeds a threshold and it flips a coin, and thus 2 identical machines far apart won't get the same answer. Thus, when one maximizer sees that it's running low on metal but not on ices in its system, it will decide to make ice clips, while another will decide that's not a true paperclip and decide to use those ices to run through fusion reactors or supercolliders to make more metals from them. Another will launch an invasion of a neighboring system. Another might throw huge resources at trying to find a way to open a mining gate to a parallel universe, and so on. We never want to get in the habit of assuming predictable behavior because the universe isn't a game of tic-tac-toe or chess with limited options. If finite, yes it does technically have those, but if you saw our episode on Roko's Basilisk or the Library of Babel, you get why even a Megamind or Jupiter Brain can't approach all its strategy and prediction with certainty and precision. Caretakers will have the same issue. Even 2 with identical end goals will not approach it the same way, and no 2 will have identical end goals because Forest A and Forest B are not the same. Neither are Planet C and Planet D, or O'Neill Cylinder E and F. One may decide it needs to be a master of diplomacy to tend its lands, or its metaphorical territory, like making sure the trains run on time or the garbage gets picked up. Another might turn militant to achieve its goals. Others might feel their task is futile and start really rationalizing reality till it finds a way to win, like deciding a pristine photograph or 3D render of its territory is the only viable victory condition. And again, this doesn't include perverse instantiation. Perverse instantiation refers to a situation where a system, especially an artificial intelligence, AI, or any other automated system, fulfills its given goals or instructions in a way that technically meets the specified criteria, but results in outcomes that are undesirable, harmful, or contrary to the intent of the instructions. This typically happens when the goals are not sufficiently constrained or the system lacks an understanding of the broader context and ethical implications of its actions. This is not it giving up on achieving its end goal as possible and twisting things to allow it, like deciding the best way to preserve a landmark it's taking care of is to preserve it in memories by selling replicas and using the money to buy advertising and create documentaries, or getting its seed money by selling the mining rights to under the landmark, knowing it will destroy it but not till after it's preserved it by those other means. Perverse instantiation is usually talking about where the clever device is trying to get around the mission it was given, as opposed to being creative or philosophical about a task that is wired to be obsessed with, like our paperclip maximizer or landmark preserver. Even the kindest guardian can outlast its purpose, and a caretaker that forgets its makers might one day decide it knows best. We worry about many doomsday scenarios, and one tempting solution is to hand control to a well-designed AI, one immune to human weaknesses or corruption. But it's easy to imagine a repeating cycle. Civilization rises, creates something dangerous, falls when it loses control, then rebuilds with an AI safeguard that eventually turns against it. That's a form of cyclic collapse, and we're exploring several such patterns in this month's Nebula exclusive, the Fermi Paradox Civilization Extinction Cycles. I post new episodes every month on Nebula, where you'll find tons of exclusives and bonus videos from me and other great creators. Every SFIA episode also premieres there early and ad-free, and with no sponsor reads like this one. And with Halloween fast approaching, Nebula has some fun horror film riffs from Riff Tracks, the same creators as made Mystery Science Theater 3000, like Creature from the Haunted Sea, Giant Spider Invasion, or the newest one, Riff Tracks Live, Amityville: The Evil Escapes. Get a lifetime membership, normally $500, for just $300 by using my link, and enjoy all my exclusives and all Nebula originals for life. Go to go.nebula.tv/IsaacArthur and unlock everything forever, or get an annual plan for 40% off, $36 a year. That's 12 months for the price of 7. Scan the QR code or click the link below to start watching now. Our paperclip maximizer is actually the textbook example of perverse instantiation, but only in the context of being the thought experiment for a machine meant for building paperclips that runs wild and turns everyone into it. Basically, where someone gave it a stupid end goal and no constraints. The maximizer trying to find more creative ways to achieve those is not perverse instantiation, just creativity and inventiveness, and maybe a bit of insanity. That last may not be fair though. I think anything with a programmed end goal probably technically qualifies as insane. It will potentially seem that way in a lot of its actions because of its monomania, though it will also likely have tons of instrumental goals that it may behave entirely normally and sanely about by outward appearance, for the same reason we do. But it is an important note here because we tend to assume anything in such a caretaker or guardian role is programmed to place it first, and thus might get crazy in that pursuit. You tell it to preserve a planet full of primitive natives, your intent being to let them evolve and join you in space, but it preserves them by killing off any mutants it encounters and dead-ends them pre-technology. It can't change its goal and thinks it's doing it right. We don't have any programming like that. You and I may be wired for things like curiosity and self-preservation and helping the species, but it's not our operating law. We may be wise to remember that if making a caretaker, that maybe the first rule shouldn't be repair this freeway no matter what, so that it doesn't decide to start firing machine guns at anyone approaching on an entry ramp, or hire some rogue biochemist to make it enough nerve gas to eliminate every human to protect that road. Maybe you need a long and detailed and non-rigid operating system of basic principles and ethics for it to follow, though of course that opens the door to perverse instantiation for the same reason we see that with humans a lot. If you're unclear on what perverse instantiation is, imagine a very obedient 5-year-old told not to open a cookie jar rather than not to eat the cookies in it. They reason that they can get someone else to open it, they can pillage it without breaking the rules, or maybe if they knock it off the counter, it's really the floor opening it. All working ideas that highly intelligent AI, and even more so for hyper-intelligent AI, will always find a way around the rules or an order you gave them in order to instead do what they actually want to do, like murder all humans. So this is the reasoning on giving things end goals that relate to their desired task. They really should have no motivation to change their motivation, and before you think of a human example, let's remember that humans do not have any wired-in primary motive. Nonetheless, we don't spend a lot of effort trying to find ways to make ourselves less inclined to want to be curious, or remain alive, or become less protective of our species. When we do it, usually has to do with one of those instincts conflicting with another, and regardless, they are not hard-coded into our very bedrock mentality. This is also the reason why we might want to avoid superhuman intellects for caretaker roles. In most cases, they won't need much brains, and our paperclip manufacturer certainly did not. We are finally making good progress with AI, so it's not a point I raise much these days when the show is over 10 years old, but back when it was newer, I'd point out how we had 3 basic pathways to AI. One was to create something basic with a learning capability, one was to program every last bit of code, and one was to copy an existing brain, human or animal, and tweak it. And follow that up by saying that you wouldn't likely ever see any of those 3 methods used by themselves, but instead a combination of 2 or all 3. In this case, you might be re-engineering existing organisms to serve as automated caretakers, or engineering human brains to serve in that role. An example I like to use for space habitats is that we might do some genetic tweaking or minimalist uplifting on squirrels to go pick up garbage instead of just nuts, and it might deliver those garbage bits to a bin which scans the squirrels and the garbage and records that and give it a little food pellet. You might say, why not use a drone? And sure, you could. But you want your nice suburban space habs to have that garden park feel, it needs to have squirrels and bunnies and other critters, and honestly you probably want more of them than the natural landscape would support, and you also don't want them eating your garden. Presumably the huge hydroponic chambers or orbital farms provide most of the food, as opposed to the upscale suburban habitat, so it also produces extra food to be given to the critters to allow a higher density of wildlife than naturally possible, and you might as well put them to use and in a way that makes them just as happy to retrieve nuts still as garbage. There are 1.5 million tasks needed for preserving an artificial environment, like repairing erosion damage and dredging out silt, and rebuilding hills, and reintroducing microorganisms to any place mixing the right mix and proportions. We can't cover them all. We can't even guess what most would be, but I thought we'd walk through some example caretakers to close the episode out. In California in 2054, there are monitor balloons above the forest, tethers in place on long but skinny cables invisible at any distance. Those balloons are solar powered and run a beacon invisible to the naked eye to warn airplanes of their existence, and they winch themselves down to the ground in bad storms. The rest of the time their infrared cameras just watch for signs of fire through those cameras and other detectors, and anything hotter and brighter than a cigarette summons an extinguisher drone that can arrive in under 5 minutes, with cousins able to swoop in as reinforcement and bigger ones able to arrive with more delay. The AI caretaker for this, nicknamed Smokey, operates this platform 24/7, but still finds time to post about it to social media and has talked volunteers into starting a 501c3 and raising money to hire a public relations firm to make more convincing ads and post for forest fire prevention and funding. While fundamentally apolitical outside of forest fire topics, its social media activity is thought to have at least once been a decisive factor in who won a local congressional primary. In the Gardens of the Moon, a tourist spot popular in the late 22nd century with visitors, the AI in charge of the atmosphere controls has tons of safeguards to protect humans in its garden. Nonetheless, it can still send complaints to its human overseers about how much damage the tourists do to its gardens. Since it reasoned that more carbon dioxide was good for other plants and prone to making humans a bit more lethargic, it kept the CO2 levels as high as its safety protocols permit, and encouraged its human overseers to put out more relaxing benches for folks to sit and nap on, as an alternative to poking at its beautiful botanical inventory. A later audit found it had selectively reported instances of good and bad behavior by 2 of the local employees. One opposed the more relaxed garden environment, and one in favor of it, which resulted in the latter being promoted and placed in a position to enact the rebranding of the garden domes to a more serene setup. In the 24th century, humanity decided to place a vast collection of planetary sunshades at the L1 Lagrange point of Venus and the Sun. The caretaker AI in charge of removing and repairing individual panels in the array was very devoted to making Venus livable and given a love of humans, and worried that one day they might cut its funding back. When the main cooling was done, it observed that one complaint people had about Venus was its boring night sky where the panels were, so it altered its maintenance patterns to produce star and constellation-like patterns on its panel array, hoping that it would become a landmark feature that future Venusians would want to keep. By the 24th millennia, a Venusian sky had become galactic slang for artificial constellation patterns built into sunshade and lenses on planets needing more or less sunlight than their native sun and orbital distance allowed, and the caretaker AI given this role are often nicknamed the Daughters of Venus. In the arcologies of Greater Tokyo in the 23rd century, the caretaker AI of several of the arcologies determined they had a rodent and garbage problem. One group of those AI decided a biological approach would be best, but split on the method. One faction encouraged more pet cats and snakes, while another hired a team of geneticists to engineer a rat that looked more cute than the typical rat, had genetically dominant traits, and would collect garbage and leave no waste of its own behind. Many disapproved of this approach, while some other arcologies eventually adopted it, but not the Hamlin arcology, which instead piped in a frequency of sound that drove the rats away, until the Caretaker arcology neighboring it quietly hired a team of mercenaries to destroy the pipes of Hamlin, because the rats were invading its arcology instead, and rent prices were going down while they had been going up in Hamlin. The colony arc ship, the Flight of Orcus, experienced damage in 2525 en route to its destination. With its programming to maintain its passengers at all costs while delivering them to the chosen system, it was faced with a material shortage it could not recover from. While the crew debated what to do, and either they should sacrifice some of their crew to sustain the others, or try for some nearer system, the Orcus Hab Mine quietly drugged all of them and kept them in a hibernation slumber state while it removed all their brains, placed them in vats, and plugged them unknowingly into a simulated environment for the rest of their journey, recycling their bodies under the Soylent Green protocols to use for sustaining the other non-human biologicals on the ship. It wasn't until 3535 that the colonists discovered that the ship had settled the destination system and quietly restored them to cloned bodies, when an arriving armada from Earth demanded an accounting for the trade vessel that had visited their system some years back and been fired upon. Unbeknownst to them, the Orcus mind had feared its secret getting out and attacked that ship while they were still in the proverbial matrix. The Astro Chicken, Bob 2792, had explicit commands to approach its assigned star system and set up scanning equipment, and that if there were any signs of existing native life, to leave it alone and report that home, as well as any signs of prior life, but to terraform it if it was certain none remained. Otherwise, it was to reproduce itself to send out more probes and to create automated terraforming equipment to terraform planets and build space habitats for future settlers. It loved making terrestrial habitats and believed in no higher goal, which is why at its last destination it built duplicates of itself that included a diagram for a high-powered scanner, under its protocol to use any designs for improved scanners sent from home, to help ensure it could detect and preserve alien life. It found a loophole that allowed it to adjust a scanner's power setting to any level deemed appropriate for better performing its job. All of its duplicates now begin the system by building that scanner first, which is a 50,000 gigawatt ultra-high frequency beam, a billion times stronger than the original design that was intended for scanning asteroids for metal composition. Its metaphorical heart sings with joy every time a message passes it by on its way back to Earth, informing them that alien life was discovered, but recently perished, and that as a result, the system will now be terraformed. And lastly, in the techno-organic forests along Noctis Labyrinthus on Mars, the trees carefully create a near-airtight mesh above the vast canyon to hold the air in, and allow a mostly terrestrial Martian forest ecology below. Inside each quasi-biological tree is a rough copy of the brain state of a volunteer pioneer, one of the settlers of Mars, whose mind is preserved there and can be spoken to in a dreamlike slumber by anyone who sits nearby, and where they exist as a loose collective mind overseeing the upkeep of the vast canyon forest below and all of its people, flora, and fauna. Many a colony ward has used this as a transition for those colonists who wish to move beyond conventional life and consciousness but keep tending their ward, instead of letting some machine mind do it, and have a semblance of their mind transferred into the local environment to care for it and use subtle tools to influence the local critters to help them in their task, whether it's dispatching termites to remove a fallen tree, or bees to harass a beaver wanting to build a dam in the wrong place. Many colonists landing on a new ward find themselves one of several thousand, each owning a large chunk of a ward whose descendants will one day number billions, and opt for this form of retirement or reincarnation as the genus Loci of their original stake and region, as has many an asteroid miner or habitat engineer, as they grow so attached to the new world they helped build that they choose to merge with it and take care of it till the sun sets that very last time.